saw this child that is being raped and trafficked and drugged and abused and assaulted and going through every possible kind of traumatic experience repeatedly in a short period of time at a young age. And the only kind of abuse that they referenced was being misgendered. Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. If you're returning, welcome back. Thank you so much for the support. On my channel, I like to give my opinion and perspective on things that are happening today, things that I think actually matter to everyday people, especially those of us trying to raise kids in the insanity known as today's society. I do like to talk about current events and politics and whatever else pops into my brain for the day. Please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and share it with others. Also, be sure you are subscribed so you can help me to grow this channel and hopefully reach more people that value logic, reason, and sanity. Also, be sure to head on over to Rumble and find me there under Outspoken Samantha in the event that YouTube decides I have violated their community standards and chooses to kick me off their platform forever. That being said, let's get into today's topic. So this is probably one of the most heartbreaking stories I have ever heard. And I see a lot of these stories similar, not as severe, but on a daily basis. And this is something that is happening more and more frequently as more parents speak out about their experiences, about their child's experiences, as they've been pulled into this gender ideology in their school, in their classroom, with their peers, and whatever it may be. And this particular story is so incredibly difficult to listen to, but I think it exposes so many aspects of this ideology and how it has infiltrated our schools, our classrooms, our teachers, our peers, counselors, doctors, the law, everything, and all of these things that we used to be able to trust to help us look out for the well-being of children when they can't be in our care as parents 24 hours a day, as we send them out into the world, as we send them to school, as we, hope and pray that they're making friends, and hoping and praying that they're making good decisions and that they're feeling comfortable in their environment and that they're feeling accepted and feeling secure, demonstrating just how our kids can be pulled right out from under us, and how all of these things that are supposed to be in place to help us support our kids are really failing us. They're failing families, and they're failing children and students. I'm going to let you listen to the story from the grandmother's perspective, who adopted her son's daughter, and she refers to her as her child, as her daughter. She essentially, just had some severe trauma early in her life, and she, was adopted by her grandmother. And then in this journey of trying to feel accepted at school, she ended up being pulled into this gender ideology by her teachers and peers. And over the course of about a year, it went from being pronouns and a name that was hidden from her parents to going through this experience of being sex trafficked and abused and brutalized, and just failed at every turn by the law, by teachers, just on so many different levels. So I think it's really important to listen to this story. I'm just going to insert it. It's about 6 minutes long. It is absolutely worth listening to the whole thing, but I will put a timestamp if you don't want to listen to the whole thing. I will also link an article in the description box, so if you prefer to read through the whole thing as opposed to listening to it. Either way, I think this is a story that everybody needs to hear, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
I am Sage's mother, better known as Nana. I adopted Sage after my son died when she was still a baby. She's been through 6 foster homes by then, but we loved her, and she blossomed into a joyful, lively girl who made music and art. Puberty began and COVID hit, and she was treated for depression and anxiety, at times very severe. Her teachers shared any concerns with me so her treatment could be adapted. The transparency ended in August of 2021 when Sage started high school. She started a public high school, and she told me that all the girls there were bi, trans, lesbian, emo, and she wanted to wear boys' clothes and be emo. Because I saw it as just a phase, it was fine with me. But at school, she told them something different. She was now a boy named Draco with male pronouns. Sage asked the school not to tell me, and they did not tell me, even though I informed them of her mental health history and medication. If I had known, this would be a much different story. She was terribly bullied. No one told me, But boys followed her, touched her, threatened violence and rape. Something happened in the boys' bathroom, but for 2 days the school told me nothing. They kept meeting with Sage alone, and she became so distraught they called me to pick her up. That evening, I found a hall pass labeled Draco, and Sage told me she was identifying as a boy, and that her counselor said she could use the boys' bathroom. She'd been jacked up against the wall by a group of boys. She was crying, terrified. I said, just stay home, we'll figure it out. That was my last conversation with Sage for 5 months. The night she ran, she thought to a young friend she'd met online. She left a note saying she was scared of what would happen if she stayed. The sheriff, FBI, search dogs were called in. I dropped to my knees in prayer. 9 days later, the FBI found her in Baltimore. My baby had been lured online, sex trafficked by DC, then Maryland. She was locked in a room, drugged, gang raped, and brutalized by countless men. It was night. The FBI told us to pick her up in Maryland the next morning. We packed our cars with blankets and stuffed animals and arrived by 8 a.m. But we were told we couldn't see her and were summoned before Judge Robert Kershaw late that afternoon. They didn't even tell Sage that we came for her. We finally entered the courtroom, and Sage appears on a huge Zoom screen from a prison cell. She looks tiny and broken, and I cry out, "I love you, Sage." Sage responds, "I love you too, Nana." But attorney Anissa Khan rebukes us. She is a he, and his name is Draco, not Sage. We were floored. What? Khan accuses us of emotional and physical abuse, that we are misgendering her. Even though we just learned she claims to be trans and we're willing to use any name and pronouns to bring her home. My husband was so tearful he kept forgetting the new pronouns, so the judge had the bailiff remove him from the courtroom. I was pleading for my child to be returned and treated for her unspeakable trauma. Judge Kershaw told me if I used the word trauma again, he would throw me out too. For over 2 months, he withheld custody. He housed Sage in a male quarters of a children's home. Sage told me she was the only girl and repeatedly assaulted. She was given street drugs by the other kids, and Khan told her she didn't care. She just wanted to win the case and all the way to Supreme Court if necessary. Khan tried to prove abuse, but we were eventually cleared by both states of all charges. Sage later told me Khan had told her to lie, that we hit her. Khan even had Sage's school counselors testify against us, though they barely knew Sage, and they didn't know us at all. Khan told my precious child I didn't want her anymore. I found out Sage never received any of the letters I sent her. Sage ran from the children's home and disappeared for months. They told me she might already be gone forever, but I couldn't give up, and I finally found a tip on her social media that led the marshals to her in Texas. She had been drugged, raped, beaten, and exploited. This time I was able to be with her for the traumatic rape exam and to bring her home. Back in Virginia, she entered the mental health facility that Judge Kershaw had ordered, as it would affirm her as a male. The therapist began pressuring her to have her healthy breasts removed. Sage was too scared to protest, but she asked me to secretly buy her girls' clothes because she wanted to be a girl, but keep them in the car. It took a kind lawyer, Josh Hetzler, to secure her discharge. After almost a year, Sage was finally home, safe, alive. Sage is receiving professional trauma care. The first trafficker has already been convicted. Sage has nightmares, panic attacks, rape-related medical issues, but there's hope. I told her she's not broken, she's just scarred. And part of that hope is that in courageously sharing her story, others will be saved. Sage said she doesn't know who she was back then. She wasn't a boy. She just wanted to have friends. But her school, the judge, the attorney, and the doctor were all blinded by their ideology. The consequences for Sage were unspeakable. Please don't let ideology harm another child. Let parents do our jobs. We know our children best, and we love them a million times more.
Listening to that story just puts a really big, just boulder in the pit of my stomach. It is so unbelievable how this child was just failed by literally everyone. And the whole time, all she was trying to do was get back to her parents, to get back to her support system. And every single person along the way that was supposed to be helping her, that was aware of her mental health and aware of her struggles, pushed her further and further away from that support system. And they didn't seem to care the pain that she was suffering. It was their commitment to this trend, to this movement, that drove their decisions, as opposed to making sure that she was safe and cared for. She was failed by the school. She was failed by the counselors, the doctors, the lawyers, the judge, everyone from her classroom all the way to the courtroom. They failed this child. Why? Because, like I said, of their dedication to this ideology, to being blinded by it. And do I think that this is the intent of every teacher and every counselor and every doctor and every lawyer who is an activist for transgenderism? Not necessarily. I don't know. But I do know that when you're blinded by these things and you become so engrossed in it, that you probably end up doing things that you never thought you would do. And I would say that any parent or any teacher or any doctor or any counselor that leads a child down this path has the potential to do what the people in Sage's case did. And every kid led down this path has the potential to end up like Sage. And I know a lot of people want to say that this is an isolated incident, that this is just, not the case for most kids. And yes, it's tragic, but most kids don't experience that kind of trauma, or they don't go through an experience like that in general. That's true, but as more parents and more kids are coming forward, in teens and young adults who have gone through similar experiences, maybe not as traumatic, but have gone through the same thing in their classrooms, with their teachers and with counselors. As they're coming forward and sharing their stories, we're finding that there are a lot of similarities, that it started in the classroom, that it started with, a teacher or, somebody or their peer group convincing them that the answer to whatever struggles that they were facing, whether they were gender related or not, that the only answer was to change their identity, was to change their name and change their pronouns. And not only that the safest way to do so was to keep their parents out of that conversation. And you have to wonder how many kids are ending up in this situation where they don't feel like they can stand up to the people that have convinced them of this, that they're so committed to it that they're now too afraid to change their mind or to reverse course and go back to their biological sex, or to recognize that their issue really isn't gender related, that it's something else. And, this movement and these ideas have just taken such a strong hold on people's minds that it becomes impossible for a kid to stand up to somebody in power, stand up to a teacher, stand up to a counselor, stand up to somebody in their life that has more authority, that is a grown adult, and to speak up and say that this is not who I am, that this is not what I want to do anymore. After they have severed, attempted to sever that relationship between the child and their parents, who do they turn to? Who do they turn to for support at this point? Because then they're kind of caught in this limbo that if they decide that they want to go back to being their biological sex, that the people that convince them not to are not going to support them anymore. But that they've already, alienated themselves from their parents, so they're not sure if they're going to support them. And just how incredibly confusing and dangerous this is. As a result of this whole situation, the Virginia House Republicans introduced a bill called Sage's Law. And just from the Daily Caller, it says, Sage's Law is named after a 14-year-old girl who was sex trafficked twice and raped after the state removed her from her parents' custody to protect her from misgendering. In a tearful testimony before the Virginia Education Committee last week, Sage's mother, Michelle, said that while she and her husband were prepared to use Sage's masculine name and pronouns, the school and the state still insisted Sage would be harmed by her parents. While fighting for custody, Sage was kept in a male children's home and she was repeatedly assaulted. Sage's Law requires parents to be notified if their child socially transitions to another gender, prohibits teachers from hiding that transition, and clarifies the meaning of child abuse to not include misgendering. And I think that's probably the craziest thing about this whole story, is that they saw this child that is being raped and trafficked and drugged and abused and and assaulted and going through every possible kind of traumatic experience that most people like don't even experience one of those. And she has gone through all of these things repeatedly in a short period of time at a young age. And the only kind of abuse that they referenced was being misgendered, calling her the wrong name and calling her the wrong pronouns, and had her parents, her loving parents that were there to support her, removed from the courtroom and cut off contact with them at different points because they were using the wrong name, because they couldn't keep it straight with all of these other things. They were willing to use the name and the pronouns, whatever she wanted to be called. All they cared about was having their child home so that they could care for her. I think that they're all going through these kind of experiences. No, but it begs the question, how many situations of abuse or how many things are happening that are being ignored and not being brought to the attention of parents, because the only abuse that they recognize is whether or not that parent affirms their child. Their child could be harassed and targeted and assaulted to some degree or some level in their school, and all of that could be completely ignored and not addressed. But as long as that child is being addressed with the correct pronouns, then that child is perfectly fine in the eyes of these people. And I honestly don't think that most of the parents that, get involved in this movement with their kid in whatever capacity, I don't think they realize the harm that's being caused and how much the system is going to work against them, and how much their child may or may not lose their voice in the whole process, in feeling like, can I advocate for myself? Can I stand up for myself? We're seeing a lot more states introduce bills and laws to protect children because this ideology is just kind of taking over everywhere. In the last week or so, Oklahoma introduced a bill to protect kids from these gender affirming surgeries, which are just child sex changes essentially. And a whole group of protesters showed up to the Capitol building in Oklahoma. And I would argue this could be construed as an insurrection, but potato, potato. Let's have a look. And I don't think any one of these parents wants their kids to end up like Sage, but I don't think they realize how high that potential is once they push their child into this thing, once they get their child involved with a system that is going to ignore every other way that their child could be threatened just for the sake of pushing them along this path. So let me know your thoughts on this video, on this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Please like this video, share it with others. Please be sure you are subscribed to help me to grow this channel. Hit the notification bell so you can be notified every time I post a video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.